Hi, everybody. It's Jen Budd, Borderland Talk. It is February 18th, 2026. And today I want to talk a little bit about the CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott. He's kind of the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. So most recently, last week, I think you probably saw that they had Mr. Scott and Mr. Lyons, who's the director of ICE, up before Congress testifying about the investigations into the killings of Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy, both in Minneapolis. I'm mostly concerned in this talk with Rodney Scott. I have a little bit of a history with Rodney Scott. I know a lot about Rodney Scott's history. And there's something that every senator and representative doesn't want to talk about. And I think you know what that's going to be. It's the cover-up teams. It's the critical incident cover-up teams from the Border Patrol. So I was surprised when I saw Senator Rand Paul, who's Republican out of Kentucky, and Senator Gary Peters, who is a Democrat out of Michigan, both questioning CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott about these killings. I cannot say whether these senators are aware of these cover-up teams. I have no idea if they know anything about them or if they've even seen the videos. I doubt they've ever looked at my work. I doubt they've looked at other people's work that deals with this. But I mean, I think when you look at the opening of Senator Paul's statement, in which he says, I think he very rightly stated that you know, as a society in the United States, essentially we grant through our representatives, through Congress, we grant police the ability to use lethal force in a variety of different circumstances. But he pointed out that that isn't just, you know, carte blanche, as he said, opportunity to then use it for anything that they want to do.
Society grants the use of lethal force to various police agencies, but that grant is not carte blanche. That grant comes with serious conditions. The grant to use lethal force is so ominous, that society only allows such force to be used in rare occasions. Today we explore the rules of engagement, the rules for the proper use of force, and the rules for the use of force that are proportional to the threat.
This is, by the way, from February 12th, where you can find it on the full interview on YouTube or on C-SPAN. So I think that was a pretty good opening, and it set the tone for the conversation that they wanted to have, not necessarily for the commissioner and the director to speak specifically to the case, but just to get a good idea of what lethal force, what are agents being taught right now in the academies. Senator Peters asked an interesting question. He asked Commissioner Scott of the CBP, and it's important. I want to point out that so CBP's Customs and Border Protection, those are the people at the ports of entry. And Scott is the commissioner of that. So he's in charge of all those people in blue. When you come back into the country, you're seeking to enter. They're at the ports, the seaports, the airports, and the land ports. But at the same time, Border Patrol is underneath that. And Border Patrol are the people in green. That's what I used to do in between the ports. So Rodney Scott, he is the commissioner of both CBP and the Border Patrol. That's important to note right here. And Senator Peters flat out questions Rodney Scott if pushing the woman onto the ground was considered a de-escalation tactic, because some people are saying, oh yeah, pushing that woman on the ground violently, that's a de-escalation tactic. And Scott replied, yeah, it is.
Would you consider pushing a woman down to the ground a de-escalation tactic?
It can be, depending on the circumstances. I don't know what happened before this. If the officer thinks that doing that is going to prevent any kind of a physical encounter, if there's a weapon or anything else, I'm not saying there is. I'm just saying in certain cases, using hand-to-hand is a de-escalation.
So this woman, who we all can look at our eyes, I mean, this is the thing that's so frustrating for the American people, and the 90% of people who have looked at these videos, this woman's clearly trying to have her back turned, trying to get away, and he shoves her pretty violently to the ground. Just looking at that, would you think that that's not de-escalation, or are you just saying you can't answer that?
No, I'm not justifying that action. I'm saying I don't have enough information in front of me to say it is or is not.
But I think one of the important things to point out about that question is it's almost kind of an improper question to be asking if you know anything about use of force. I think instead of saying, is it a de-escalation tactic to push somebody on the ground, I think the better question would have been to address the fact that use of force, any use of force, is a response to resistance. And there are different levels of responses. I'm going to show you the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center use of force continuum that they used to use back in the day when I was an agent. This is how I was taught use of force. And so you could say there's different levels. If the person is being compliant and doing what you say, then you just use cooperative controls like, okay, I need you to stand over here or stand behind this line, and then they do it, and that's fine. And then it goes up to passive resistance, which is kind of where you're sitting on the ground and they tell you to get up and move and you choose not to. A lot of times they will pepper spray you if you don't do that. So contact controls on the body, pinching nerves or grabbing their arm and escorting them and forcing them to do that. I think that what Rodney Scott is saying here is that if the officer thought that the person was coming at them or maybe was going to grab a gun, then pushing them down on the ground to destabilize them could be considered a de-escalation tactic in that way. But that's not what happened in this case. What happened in this case is that the agent walked up to her and then just pushed her on the ground. So that is actually a use of force violation. I kind of wonder if part of the problem is that they don't use this use of force continuum that they used to teach us back in the day. They stated they stopped using it before 2010, stating that they believe that it still violated people's civil rights and Fourth Amendment rights. And so they did away with it. So quite honestly, we're not sure what they're teaching them nowadays. And that might be part of the problem, is that they don't use this continuum anymore when they teach people. But then what's interesting to me in this conversation, in this testimony before Congress, is then Senator Rand Paul calls Rodney Scott out on his shit.
I think what's important about the encounter isn't even the specifics of the investigation. It's about what are your officers trained to do. So your officers are watching it. Some of them are here in the audience. Hopefully some are watching at home. And they need to know. They need a explicit. So there were people who said, and they were part of the government, I don't think they were interviewed, but part of DHS and part of the administration said that, yes, the officers were using de-escalation tactics. Nobody believes that, all right?
No.
I'm just going to stipulate that. I don't even need your opinion on that. No one in America believes shoving that woman's head in the face in the snow was de-escalation. But your officers need to know they had a verbal encounter with them. She did not place her hands on the officers. She wasn't trying to get their weapon. It's not great. I mean, I don't like to see these encounters either. But is it appropriate for the officers to respond to a verbal barrage of words or whatever? Is it proper to physically throw a woman down or to throw anyone down?
If the only action is verbal, no.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
Yes.
Rodney Scott is essentially required to admit that verbal assaults against officers do not justify this level of use of force. So it doesn't matter what they say to these officers, if they curse at them, if they call them pedophiles, if they call whatever they do, they call them anything under the sun. Cannot physically use force on them just because it's a verbal assault. So then he's asked about Alex Preddy and the beating of Alex Preddy when the agents are on top of him. And Scott's reply in that clip you just saw was just, it was interesting on a couple different reasons. One, he stated, quote, he was non-compliant, not following any guidance, and fighting back nonstop, unquote. And I find that interesting because everybody in the world who watches that video if they're not biased, sees that Alex Pretty was not fighting back. Not at one time was he. He was trying to defend himself. He was trying to protect those women. He was trying to keep himself from being beaten, which is why he got on the ground and tried to get as small as he could. But nobody in the world, as Senator Rand Paul notes, thinks that Pretty was fighting back. Nobody. It's just ridiculous to say that. And at the same time, Scott mentions in his testimony, and I found it really interesting, that one of the ways he gets out of commenting about whether the use of force was completely justified in this case, he says, well, I can't tell what Pretty's saying to the officers, and I can't tell what the officers are saying to Pretty, which he had just admitted that words alone cannot be used to justify use of force. So now he's qualifying. He can't say whether it's a use of force because he doesn't know what they're saying. So that kind of doesn't make any sense. How does he know that Pretty was, quote, not following any guidance, unquote, if he admits that he cannot hear what the agents are saying to Mr. Pretty? So how would he know if they're following any guidance? So he says he can't comment, but yet he comments, and then he, of course, contradicts himself in that statement. He eventually just kind of falls back on saying, I don't want to comment until the investigation is done, which is kind of what they always try and do. He does eventually finally admit to Senator Paul that pushing someone down for verbal assaults is not appropriate use of force. So he again commits to that verbal assaults do not justify use of force, any use of force against people. Senator Paul then went on to state that he saw literally no resistance from Mr. Pretty.
At no time in the encounter, we've gone forward a couple seconds, do you see him try to strike an officer, nor does he brandish a weapon, which was alleged as well. And so we're going through this, and it's like, they will say, oh, he's, resisting at some point. I don't see any resistance, but it's kind of hard to tell when you have 6 people on you and you're moving, are you resisting? I mean, the natural instinct is when 6 people are on top of you, you're going to be trying to move. You're not going to be placid, particularly after they've sprayed him several times. But I see nothing here. I mean, not even a hint of something that was aggressive on his part. Everything was retreat.
The allegation of brandishing a weapon, it's important to note that the word brandish is a legal term, so you need to be very careful when you use it and accuse people of brandishing. It's more than just, hey, look, I got a weapon. It's more than that. It's like pointing it at somebody. So there's a legal definition to the term brandishing. And so when that allegation came, it came the day of the shooting, within hours of the shooting, and it came from Secretary of DHS Kristi Noem. Senator Paul further pointed out that most people who have been pepper sprayed, as Mr. Pretty was seen being pepper sprayed, and then had 5 to 6 agents jump on top of him, would quite honestly have some sort of reaction. So the expectation that you can spray people in the face, directly in the eyes and in the nose and in the mouth with pepper spray, and then jump on top of their back and expect them not to have any reaction, even Senator Rand Paul finds that a ridiculous statement by law enforcement. I noted that neither the director of ICE, Mr. Lyons, nor the commissioner of CBP, Mr. Scott, had any response to that statement whatsoever. And Senator Paul really didn't ask them for a response. He was simply stating that. So what Senator Rand Paul is saying is that it was the actions of Scott's agents that would have caused any kind of reaction or any form of resistance from Mr. Pretty in that incident, even though he did not resist. Paul goes as far to say he does not even see, quote, even a hint of something that was aggressive on Mr. Pretty's part, unquote. He even pointed out that Mr. Pretty retreated from the agents time and time again, trying to get away from them. Both the commissioner and the director of ICE had nothing to say about this. Scott also stated on a few questions that he could not comment on the investigation until it was completed. That's interesting because, it didn't stop CBP from leaking pictures of the evidence to DHS Secretary Noem. Within minutes of the Preddy killing, this is what enabled her to label him as a domestic terrorist and say that he was actually there intending to cause mass casualties or mass murder is what he had intended. She suggested he intended. Although these men are looking very stoic in Congress, saying that they don't like to talk about these cases until the investigations are done, they are being disingenuous and dishonest in that they allow their agents to then send out pictures of evidence that then somehow makes its way up to these leaders. And then they put this information out. This is what we've seen down here on the border time and time again. So, but let's go back to Scott's statement that it was his CBP agents who were responsible for preserving the evidence.
Who is doing the investigation?
So multiple agencies are doing an investigation. The FBI is involved, FBI Civil Rights are involved, ICE is involved, and CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility is involved. CBP's specific role is to preserve the evidence.
So preserving the evidence is an important task. It's one of the most important tasks if you ever hope to have a criminal investigation, if you ever hope to have a decent civil investigation. But here's the thing. If you know Rodney Scott, the current CBP Commissioner of CBP, then you know that in 2010, he was the Border Patrol Chief in San Diego sector. And if you've watched the HBO documentary Critical Incident, Death at the Border, which shows how Rodney Scott's critical incident teams in the United States Border Patrol were illegally and secretly acting as if they had the legal authority to be evidence collection teams, were obstructing justice, getting rid of evidence, getting rid of witnesses, and basically contaminating evidence so that agents couldn't be held accountable for the killing of Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, and that Rodney Scott was in charge of that, then you know that he has used cover-up teams in the past. He did this for Anastasio's case. He did this also in the Valeria Touchkeen Alvarado case, which I give a link to in the written form of this podcast. The thing to know about the critical incident teams was that although before Rodney Scott was appointed as CBP commissioner under the Trump administration, it was the Biden administration that took these teams, admitted that they could not stay within Border Patrol because they did not have the legal authority and the legal training, and that they were secret and that they were illegal and needed to be removed. He ended up taking them and quietly placing them in CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility, their OPR. So you have agents that for 3 decades have run cover-up teams in the Border Patrol that Rodney Scott has used to cover up at least 2 killings that we know about when he was a Border Patrol chief. You have that man now in charge of all of CBP. And you have the fact that Biden took these illegal cover-up teams and rolled them into CBP OPR to legalize them and hide the cover-up of the cover-ups. And so Rodney Scott is now back in charge of these teams and apparently just testified that these teams are part of the investigations, at least of the Alex Preddy shooting. That is extremely concerning because nobody has been held responsible for this, except one court has tried to hold them responsible for this. So in May of 2025, CBP Commissioner, now CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott, was found to be responsible for the death and torture of Anastasio by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The U.S. is a member of this International Commission of the Americas. So from Canada, sometimes I like to call it Canada, sorry, in Canada, all the way down to the very tip of South America. We all belong to this international court. And the U.S. testified in this trial. And yet the commission still found Rodney Scott and the critical incident teams and the people involved in the killing of Anastasio responsible for his death and torture. They also advised that the Department of Justice must reopen this case and hold people accountable. It found that CBP and Border Patrol, under the command of Scott at the time, had, quote, had violated the rights of Anastasio, his right to life, his right to health, his right to justice, personal integrity, and the humane treatment during his deprivation of freedom. So during his time in custody, they denied him of all of these rights. But essentially, neither senator nor congressman have ever bothered to question Rodney Scott on this finding. They have never bothered to question Rodney Scott on HBO's film. They have never bothered to ask about why these teams were suddenly pulled out of Border Patrol and moved into CBP and allowed to continue acting as if they are evidence collection teams. Not a single Republican nor Democrat has ever brought up the film or the allegations, nor the allegations made by the court. Not a single one has ever brought up that those agents involved in the cover-ups and the illegal teams are now the evidence collection teams for CBP OPR, and is run by Rodney Scott. So the problem is we cannot trust, even though Congress and what Senator Rand Paul said in the beginning, I was very pleased to hear that. We as Americans, because of this, we cannot trust our congressional leaders. They have consistently failed to hold the leaders of ICE, CBP, and Border Patrol accountable. They had no problem talking about the case. These leaders have no problem talking about the case when they were bad-mouthing the victims of their agents. They only claim they can't talk about these cases when they're called to on the carpet about the actions of their agents. It is only when you ask them about the actions of their agents when they zip up and say, oh, I can't talk about an ongoing investigation. They'll gladly talk about whatever drugs they can find in the victims. They'll gladly talk about the behavior of the victims. They'll gladly say, well, I can't say for sure. They'll gladly claim, oh, he had a gun. They'll gladly say all this stuff until you start questioning the agents. Then all of a sudden they find their ethics and morals about discussing ongoing investigations, when the answer should always be, we can't talk about ongoing investigations. So while I was kind of happy to see this questioning starting to happen, it kind of is inconsequential when you think about it. It's not going to address what I call that elephant in the room, which is Rodney Scott, he's led so many of these cover-ups. How can you ignore the fact that there is a major documentary out there, a major motion picture out there with Rodney Scott in it, talking about all this, showing about all of this, and yet you call him up there to Congress as the head of CBP, as if anything that comes out of his mouth without addressing the accusations of the film is somehow relevant. So until we do this, until these people are brought to an American court of justice and dealt with, everything that comes out of CBP and Border Patrol's mouth has to be suspect. It has to be. We have got to get Congress to start talking about these cover-up teams and the fact that they still exist within CBP. Everything that they touch is contaminated, and you should not believe anything that comes out of their mouths.